Okay, that's great. So all of you are online, and perhaps I can briefly conclude and let you start to have this wonderful discussion, informal discussion. What I was already starting to say that in the previous session, the image of the countryside of this extended metropolitan region that is emerging is of a space that is still in a lack of proper recognition. And a recognition in terms of the language of the architecture that has been implemented in the countryside, which refers sometimes to prescriptive settings in terms of the element and the style, but also the emergence of a narrative and discourse in the media and the cyberspace from the rural micro-celebrity in the way that are defining this countryside. But at the same time, there is a tendency to, let's say, describe these spaces from an urban setting, so from an urban citizen view. This becomes space for of nostalgia, sometimes of pastoralism, becomes space under the risk of a social division, and also a space that are requesting a new type of implementation in terms of governance, as discussed from the first section. So it's a very complex space that, in the case of China, that become more, let's say, emphasized because the countryside is also administratively different from Europe, for example, for North America. And these are more or less some of the aspects that we were discussing. And one of the initial questions could be, from your perspective, from different places, how it could be the trajectory for further studies, which could be the new challenges that those spaces are facing now.
Yeah, and I heard also from Luke and Tommaso that their presentation was a moment of interesting discussion. What was for me very, very interesting at the opening of the series of moments of discussion was the political understanding also of this idea of horizontality. I think that Lynn was very explicit on that, and this is that we are finally at the moment in which we have to understand that the different layers that compose this horizontal metropolis discussion and research. And I mean, politically means that you engage society. So what we were saying also in relation with the inhabitants, you engage different levels of power. You work with different levels of power. The question of governance becomes much more clear. And of course, there is the substratum that is this territory with its different layers and capacity to adapt, to be adapted, and to be resolved. So, in a way, I think we have to go through a longer analytical period, in which the horizontal metropolis was mainly the idea to focus on the contemporary configurations of rural-urban territories to finally now address maybe some more complex layers that are fundamental to understand this transition we have to go through, and to understand the social and political potential of this kind of urban form. So maybe for the future, I think that the analytical perspective can be of course always resolved and deepened. But what we need is also maybe to clarify the dimension, the biopolitical dimension of the horizontal metropolis, where we are discussing new forms of life, new forms of power, new forms of state, and how they can be adapted to the actual societal conditions and also to the actual ecological adaptation needs. So maybe this is for me the fundamental point that emerged in the in the conversation we had, that was not evident in the past. In the past, it's kind of the question of horizontality was always brought to the morphological type of city. No, I mean, a city made of open spaces, of agriculture, water, smaller housing randomly disposed in the land. But now I think we more and more understand that the question of the relations, the type of relations, the horizontality of relations, shift from the analytical aspect to now the more projectual aspect that includes also the forms of governance and the relation with in broad sense to political challenges.
Okay, thank you, Ginny, and perhaps Professor Lin or Charles, if you want to comment.
Well, thank you for the opening. It's nice to see everyone. I could add a couple of things to what Paola, opened with. Obviously, this conversation of the horizontal metropolis is continuing to be quite relevant for us here in North America. And I'll pick up, where Paola left off. On the one hand, for those of us that study urbanization, I believe we're always in a place where processes of urbanization, new forms, new conditions are arising. And that's happening at a pace globally that's well beyond our ability to keep track of everything, let's say. And so we're in a kind of dilemma, let's say scientifically, or in terms of academic discipline or profession, and that we're always chasing, we're always trying to catch up by describing these emergent conditions. And this notion of the horizontal as being worthy of study, of course, has been well established. And I can offer maybe three thoughts there. The first is something that Paola already mentioned, which is the extent to which, the conversation of the horizontal metropolis begins with a study of space and form, a kind of geographic study of morphology and typology, taking the tools of the urbanist and applying them outside of the traditional city. I think that was quite productive. It's ongoing, but I think it's well established. There was a second phase that emerged in recent decades, which had more to do with, let's say, the metabolism of these spaces. It has more to do with ecology, more to do with the relationships to the natural world. And this brought landscape to the fore very much in our discourse around landscape urbanism and ecological urbanism have found a kind of alliance there, let's say. But today, what I see is what Paola described as a kind of biopolitics, a focus, a renewed focus in the horizontal metropolis on questions of citizenship, individual identity, collective community, migration, identity formation in relationship to the state, and the idea of a joining group. So those questions are really quite present for us here as well. I think we are still developing the tools, the language to begin to understand them, but they are by far the most interesting questions for us today. So that's the first point, I would say broadly. I think there's some consensus on that. The second point that I would say that's interesting for us today, it's already been mentioned in this call, has to do with the relationship between the urban and the rural. So the inside and the outside. There are those colleagues of ours on the left who are arguing there is no distinction, right? So Christian Schmid and Neil Brenner have been rereading Henri Lefebvre, arguing for a planetary urbanization. There are microplastics in the clouds above the Swiss Alps. Ice cores in the Arctic show evidence of human shaping of the climate, and therefore for those, they would argue there's no distinction between the urban and the rural. The entire planet is urbanized. I tend to take a more moderate view. I do think these distinctions are maybe relevant. And in this regard, if we look again, both in North America, if we look in East Asia, particularly China, what's going on with respect to the countryside and the development of a new rurality is absolutely central in our thought today, particularly in the economic slowdown that we've seen in the recent years as the project to lift the kind of lifestyle and quality of life and the economy for those left back in the villages. This maintains, I think, a very, very important central presence for us in thinking about these topics. And then finally, briefly, the last point that I would make that's really on our minds, the third point I think that's relevant here, has to do with the horizontal metropolis relative to questions of preservation and conservation. That is, what do we keep? What do we maintain? These are, I think, among the most interesting topics for us today. On the one hand, we are seeing in the metropolis this kind of ongoing churn that renews and rebuilds and removes its past often, whether it's the agricultural countryside and culinary heritage being erased, or whether it's the erasure of local community. But on the other hand, we also have questions of climate and carbon and the sequestration of carbon. And we know that the limits to new construction is on the minds of many, many people. So how do we think about preservation today? It's my belief that preservation and conservation are among the most important topics today. They're under-theorized. They tend to be viewed in very narrow points of view. And I feel like we really lack the kind of scientific or, let's say, rigorous disciplinary understanding of how to think about preservation in a serious way in these contexts. So those are the topics that are maybe most relevant for our audiences. But I'll open to our colleagues and see what others have to say.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, all
yes,
right.
we can.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that it's really a great pleasure to rejoin this conversation. I mean, I was here at the very beginning, and so it gives me tremendous honor and pleasure to join the concluding session. I fully enjoy the conversation and the material that Andrea sent to me. Now, to be in the interest of time, I think that I will make just a few points. The first point, I mean, Andrea, you raised question about what are some of the challenges that we all will be facing as far as the concept of horizontal metropolis is concerned. I think that theoretically, it raises challenges to those of us who continue to think about the pattern and processes of human settlement transition. Now, the popular perception, and I mean, like it or not, we continue to believe that there is a certain norm, perhaps an international norm of human settlement transition, characterized by the important roles played by cities or towns. So conventionally, we tend to believe that as far as human settlement transition is concerned, we're talking about, the attraction of cities and towns, migration from the rural area to some of the cities that tend to occupy strategic location because of the economy of scale, the competitive advantages, or, if you follow Alan Scott, the urbanization economy, right? The urbanization economy that make it attractive for some of the most attractive cities and towns to continue to be the center of human settlement transition. Now, if we look at the new pattern and processes characterized by horizontal metropolis, maybe we are looking at alternative that may not necessarily be driven or attracted by a few number of cities and towns. In other words, unlike the classic example of the American megalopolis, anchored upon New York, Boston, Washington, D.C. When you come to the Yangtze River Delta, for example, obviously, the attraction of Shanghai, Nanjing, and Hangzhou, certainly they are prominent. However, we are also looking at forces that are coming from below. I mean, for example, in the suburban area of Shanghai, you have the tremendous success of Suzhou and Kunshan and many others. So in other words, if we really take this concept of horizontal metropolis seriously, perhaps we have to give up some of the conventional thinking characterized by this, city center or town center processes of human settlement transition. What needs to be done, perhaps, is what I may call some sort of directional and relational thinking. Directional and relational thinking. Perhaps taking into consideration not just some of the top-down, technological diffusion, the spreading out of the economy of scale, but also the bottom-up forces spontaneously coming from below. I think that is perhaps the first point. Like theoretically, conceptually, we need to think, we need to move away from the conventional perception of city center or town center processes of human settlement transition. I think that is the first point. The second point is more concerned with the practices in China. Now I understand that this is how in the Yangtze River Delta. I also understand that you are recording our conversation, that perhaps a large audience may come from China. So we need to say a few words about some of the challenges that Chinese planners, practitioners will be facing in the years to come, in relation to the concept of horizontal metropolis. First of all, I think that this cross-jurisdictional tension that really characterize the Yangtze River Delta will be a tremendous challenge. I mean, there are persistent tension between places like Nanjing, Shanghai, and Hangzhou, or Suzhou, or Kunshan, or Zhenjiang. Different individual economies, they all have their own vested interest. So it's going to be very challenging. How are they going to coordinate diverse interests? How are they going to organize themselves? How are they going to really bring everybody to sit down and work together? Once again, if we take this concept of horizontal metropolis seriously, that is the first challenge. The second challenge would be, I echo Charles' remark just now, the urban-rural tension. Despite the recognition of this growing blurring of the boundary between urban and rural economy, urban and rural sector, urban and rural settlements, if you take a look at the system of policy making, administration, I mean, if you go to the central authority, they continue to rely upon different hierarchical structure responsible for the management of urban versus rural economy, urban versus rural settlement. So I think that the second challenge that Chinese planners and policymakers will really need to face is how are they going to break down this boundary, deeply rooted boundary between the urban and the rural. I think that is the second challenge. The third challenge, remember at the beginning, I bring in the notion of fragmented authoritarianism. Fragmented authoritarianism. And that is when we look at China, well, at the risk of being controversial, the political system in China today continue to, it's not going away from a typical authoritarian state. I think that on the contrary, we can argue that there is tendency to reinforce this authoritarianism. But yet under authoritarianism, you have fragmented agency and actors, vertically and horizontally. Central and local government that belong to different lines, different ministry. For example, if you go to Hangzhou, I'm sure you will be looking at not only agents and actors at the municipal level, but also some of the state-owned enterprises directly as well. The third challenge that Chinese authorities, Chinese planners will be facing would be how are they going to reconcile the tension under among different agency and actor under the current fragmented authoritarianism that really characterize contemporary China. The last challenge is, just to echo what Charles has just shared with in his remark, is the how to reconcile the tension between sustainable development, currently a lot of concern about carbon neutrality on the one hand, but also there are deep concern about problem from the economy. So how do we, on the one hand, maintain economic growth, generation of employment and income, but on the other hand, to reduce carbon emission, in the interest of climate governance, carbon neutrality. So I think that I'll stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, George. Paola, if you want to add some conclusive comments.
Thank you. The horizontal metropolis gives a perspective. Now, it's not just an analytical game, and in particular in relation to these standard forms of urbanization, there is a kind of direction that is proposed, a direction that has to be investigated, and it has to be investigated also with the fact of remaining conceptual. And I think that we have to insist on this, on the clarification of the concepts that are inside this idea of horizontality, because they are not fully shared, or let's say we are not normally working in a context where horizontality is taken into consideration. We are normally working into a hierarchical context where everything we are discussing, from mobility to, I don't know, the social infrastructure, everything is imagined to be organized in a hierarchical and concentrated way. So there is something to be reopened, dismantled, rediscussed, and I think that this is still a work that has to be done, because we need also to prove that other forms of order are working, are possible. Otherwise, there will be always the prejudice about the fact that only hierarchy has proved to be the efficient way to organize a territory. So, of course, there is already an existing literature on that, but I think that there is still work on a conceptual level. The second point of the radicality, I think, is also important in the sense that we have to continue to explore and to bring counter projects, because that's the point. We are working on projects that are not yet in the kind of mainstream thinking, and then we need to continue this type of exploration. And finally, I think that could be very, very important to publish the output of this seminar, Andrea, and really to make a difference. I want to say manifest, but nevertheless, a very clear overview of the main issues that we all want to metropolis is connected. So here, for example, what Sam say about the question of conservation, of selection, of understanding the nature of what is already there, the material, the material nature, but also the community or social nature of what is already existing is a very important point. So to conclude, I think we have to remain conceptual, because we still need to work a lot on the concepts that are part of this. It is really a different way not to look at the city and at the territory, and then we have to continue to have moments of debate and of discussion, including maybe also other levels of society.
Thanks for that, Paola. And, what I could add just briefly is I want to return to this the first point, the idea of the proposition of the horizontal metropolis or any of these tools that we use as not simply empirical, right? They are that, they can be that, but they're not simply that. They're also a tendency. So they have this kind of double valence. On the one hand, they have the capacity for being empirically observed and accounting for conditions emerging, but they also have a kind of value, what I would describe, Paola, if you would allow me, as a kind of weak ideology. You know, I think something similar happens in landscape urbanism or ecological urbanism, which is a kind of value system that says we've given quite a lot of attention to these other forms, and this set of conditions is understudied. And it's not simply an empirical observation of neutrality. It's not just science. It's also a kind of value system that says maybe there are values in these places. Maybe they have been underappreciated. Maybe we can give them a level of appreciation. And what prevents it from arriving to a more dominant position ultimately is that we've built these institutions, you know, government agencies and processes of planning and political structures, which are really built around the old paradigm. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, these processes of urbanization, capital flows, the building of the world is always outpacing those structural changes, let's say. And so I think in the academy, I feel like part of my job is to try to keep track of what's going on and develop these theoretical tools. And in that sense, I think the horizontal metropolis is as timely as ever, particularly as we look at questions of citizenship. Professor Lin, your comments about forms of fragmentary dictatorship and minor fascisms, I think could not be more current or relevant to us here.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any feedback or comments from the audience, from the Chinese audience in particular.
Yes, there is one question.
Yes, good evening or good morning. My name is Eugenio. I'm co-curating with Andrea the Horizontal Metropolis exhibition and a series of events. Since Professor Lin introduced the dimension of, let's say, the practitioner in a way, I mean, practitioner, but policy making, so a more concrete dimension in order to, let's say, treat this topic of urban and rural and of the rural dimension. I would like to ask to each of you, if possible, and also according to the context that you know better, maybe Professor Lin, I guess he knows very well the Yangtze River Delta area. Professor Whaldeim knows very well about the US context, and Professor Viganò knows very well about European context. Under, let's say, looking through the lens of the practice, or let's say of the practical point of view, what do you think that could be one action that we could take? Because yes, I am a professor as well. I am a colleague of Andrea, but we are also in a way practicing here, no? So, in your opinion, no, in a going very down to earth, although we are scholars, what is your position at this? I mean, towards a possible, practical action, let's say, working on the rural. And even making projects in the rural. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, in the professional, very operational activity, this notion of horizontal metropolis is very inspiring. In the last years, we have been working on several European territories, from Switzerland with the Great Geneva, the construction of a vision for Great Geneva, until the Wallonian project we are developing in Belgium, and in all cases, the question of the horizontal metropolis has been always present, and we have always tried to work on those intermediary, let's say, context with the goal to bring them to kind of more emancipated, not way of constructing themselves, and always trying to reduce the dependency of those territories on the main centers. In the case of Geneva, of course, the attraction of Geneva, and then the marginality of the rest of the territory. So through the themes of mobility, through the questions of work, where is the work, where are the social infrastructure, and these are very, very difficult points and also very political points. In the case of Great Geneva, for example, that is a trans-border type of metropolis. We immediately face the rigidity also of transnational type of metropolis that are constructed on the idea that the work is on one side, in this case it's on the Swiss side, and the French side should mainly act as a living area for the people that would work in Geneva. So to transform this, that is also of course an ambition of the communities, of the local communities on the French side. It's not easy because there is the form of power are this. Geneva is more powerful, and of course they bring their own vision as the one vision. And we found ourselves sometimes in quite embarrassing positions because we were clearly understanding that the French side had different ideas and different visions, and we were sharing with them those visions because they were right. There is it's not correct in a way, not to imagine that a territory has just to solve the problem of another one. So these kind of things are very, very practical and very, very concrete. Or, for example, I can speak of the Walloon region that is a kind of marginal part of Europe, and we know how today so many new marginal territories are everywhere in Europe. When you go to Germany, when you go to Great Britain, when you go to Italy, I mean, we have half of the country that is made of marginal, underused, sometimes abandoned territories. And we are speaking of Europe. So we are speaking of, nevertheless, one of the parts of the world that is the most, safe from the point of view of the welfare, of the presence of the welfare state, from the point of view of other facilities that we have. So in that sense, I think that the last decade has been a period of reinforcing this hierarchical reading, the hierarchical construction of territories. And today we absolutely need to stop this idea of concentration and hierarchization, and we have to come back to what are the potentials, what are the possibilities that any territory can have. So I think that your point is very good. But we need, it's not necessarily time to bring the horizontal metropolis as a flag, but nevertheless, this horizontal metropolis is really inspiring when you have to take decisions, when you have to criticize existing transport systems, when you have to revise the way in which, I don't know, the organization of everyday life is imagined. I think that the connection and the concreteness of the horizontal metropolis is very easy to find into the professional and the complete transformation of the territory.
Thank you, Paola.
Thank you.
Perhaps Charles, if you would like to comment on the question.
Of course. Yeah, thank you for the question. For me, I'll put this in the context of my applied research. We have a research group here at the Harvard GSD called the Office for Urbanization. We're within the university, and we do a kind of applied, scenario planning for communities, cities around the world. And mostly we're helping communities think about change in the built environment over time and before they get to planning, before they get to policy. We've been doing this work for the past decade or so. We've been working in North America extensively, in Latin America, quite a lot of work in East Asia. And so my comments are in that context. In terms of what we could do that might be practical, I'll just begin with my observation that very often in these contexts, we find a lack of empathy or understanding between, let's say, the center, the capital, wherever the power basis is, and the periphery or the edge. We're working quite a lot with communities that don't feel as though they have the support or the attention of the people in the capital, let's say. And very often the people in the capital, I mean, policy makers, planners, people that are making choices, will impose policies, quite often well-intentioned, but in a very very unilateral way. And this often precludes local experimentation or adjustments to local cultures. And in this regard, you know, my primary recommendation would be that for policymakers, urbanists, people thinking about these things, is to keep room for difference, to build into their workflow ways of acknowledging and allowing for local difference. A part of this is simple being empathetic to differences, but a part of it is also being aware of the fact that for people that are working in places that are not at the center, places that are not the metropolis in traditional sense, they often feel as though they're not being listened to, they're not heard, they're not seen, and that rules, policies, projects are being imposed still in a very top-down way that do not allow them to accommodate their local histories, their traditions, their cultures, or to respond to unique opportunities. And so I think that's one of the big challenges we have right now is, on the one hand, having like standards. For example, here in Massachusetts, we now have statewide mandates and incentives for increasing the density of housing around transit. This is arguably a very good idea. For carbon reasons, for density, for taking automobiles off the road, there are many reasons, land use, there are many reasons why this is a very good policy from the point of view of the state. But from the point of view of a local community in Gloucester, Massachusetts that we work with on an ongoing basis, this is an onerous burden. It doesn't understand their reality, which is a very good reality. And there's very little flexibility, or I would say even understanding or communication between these two places. So that's what I could offer by way of what we might do practically, is to have a sense of empathy about differences and understand that not every policy is going to land the same way in every particular local condition.
Thank you, George. George, do you have a comment?
Yeah, very quickly. I think that that's really an excellent question. Yeah. Now, from the point of view of China, once again, I believe that you have a sort of an obligation to address the interest of the community, of the local audience in Hangzhou and in the Yangtze River Delta. I think that in terms of what could be done or what sort of action that needs to be taken, I can think of two important types of action. The first is obviously institutional and political changes. It's perhaps really a coincidence. I mean, this is really a blessing that Chinese leader Xi Jinping was here in the Yangtze River Delta about a week ago. He came to chair a meeting involving the quote-unquote economic integration of the Yangtze River Delta. So I think that here we are presented with an unprecedented golden opportunity to really do something in terms of institutional and political changes to basically to break down boundaries, breaking down boundaries that hamper effective mobility and coordination within the horizontal metropolis. This involves breaking down boundaries between the urban and the rural, bearing in mind that, like it or not, Chinese household registration system continue to play a very, very important role. I mean, Charles raised another issue concerning citizenship. Citizenship in China is not granted, it's not taken for granted. citizenship has to be contested. You have to earn. So I think that the concept of horizontal metropolis has presented an excellent opportunity for us to break down many of these boundaries, this barrier, in the interest of mobility, equity, social justice. I think that this is, so take this perhaps one of the things that could be done politically. If we are talking about decision making, now once again, at the risk of emulating the American model, Charles, you are from the eastern coast. Now on the west coast, you have the Bay Area, yeah, the Bay Area in California, and I understand there that they are able to form a regional governance to coordinate decision-making of participant municipalities and cities that share common interest. I think that this is an excellent example for people in the Yangtze River Delta to think about. Obviously, we're not talking about a wholesale application. I mean, necessary adaptation will need to be done. But I think there's a way to go, and it's workable. Is feasible in the American context, and as far as the Chinese context is concerned, as I just mentioned, top Chinese leader visited the region just about a week ago to try to promote this idea of regional social and economic integration. So I think that in terms of what could be done or what needs to be done, I think institutional and political changes are some of the things that I could think about. And secondary is some of the technological innovation in terms of planning, infrastructure, environmental, protection, regional coordination, involving the movement of goods and people, information. I think technically, there's a whole lot to be done. So I think that once again, the notion of horizontal metropolis simply open the eyes of not just scholars and academics, but also policymakers, practitioners, professionals of all of the the participating municipality and cities and counties and and local economies, not just in the Yangtze River Delta, but arguably elsewhere in China as well. Yeah.
Going away, I would like to thank you very much, Andrea. You made an incredible effort, and also to organize again a moment of discussion on those themes that are still very, very rich, open, and in need to be treated. So I really want to thank you for your effort and supporting the idea that this discussion should be made even more public, and that we should publish it in a way that everybody can participate in. And I want to thank you also, Whaldeim and Charles Whaldeim. Thank you very much for being here today, although we are very, very far away. And I hope to find another moment to discuss with you, because I really think it's fascinating discussion that can come out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you all, and to thank all of the institutions that supported us and the Hangzhou West Railway Station for the very incredible support during these months, with the wish of continuing our effort and research in the improvement of the performance of these spaces and the recognition. I really thank you all once again, and our audience, for participating today and the previous session. Thank you very much.